Well, happy Thursday, everybody, and welcome to yet another Ball Publishing webinar. I'm Chris Beatties, editor of Growertalks and Green Profit and the e-newsletter Acres Online, and I will be your host for the next hour or so as we tackle today's topic, responsible use of peat resource management for future generations. You know, your potting media is one of the most important inputs that you use other than light and water and fertilizer, right? And peat moss is the most important potting media ingredient. But if you Google, and I did this morning, if you Google, is peat moss sustainable? Or is it okay to use peat moss? Like a consumer might type in or a gardener might, you'll find articles pop up like, what is peat moss and should you skip it? From Architectural Digest, and why gardeners should stop using peat from the New York Times. Not good for our industry and misleading too. Well, today's guest is going to tell you the facts about peat moss and how the Canadian peat moss industry has been working hard to ensure that peat is sustainable and renewable and available to gardeners and growers for a long, long time. He's going to arm you to be able to discuss the topic with your customers who ask, and if you yourself happen to be questioning peat, well, hopefully you'll be open-minded today and learn something new. Now, as usual, I am not the expert on the topic, never am, but I know someone who has helped plan the restoration of hundreds of acres of peat bog and wetlands across the U.S. and Canada. He is Pierre-Olivier Jean, Natural Resource Manager for Premier Tech's Growers and Consumers Business Group. Welcome, Pierre-Olivier.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
We are happy to have you here. Now, where are you broadcasting from? I sense a hint of a French-Canadian accent. Surprise, surprise.
Yes, I'm based in Quebec. I live in Rivière-du-Loup. It's a 2-hour drive east from Quebec City.
Oh, it must be beautiful out there. Well, but maybe not quite this time of year.
Yeah, we've had 12 inches of snow. I make the effort of translating the units, so be
30 centimeters indulgent. For Pete's sake.
That would be roughly 30.
Yeah, see? I know a 10-centimeter pot is 4 inches. That's how that's all I know about the metric system right there. But we will work together and together we will cover the world here. Now, I'm very interested in your educational background, but how you came to work in the peat industry. Tell us about that briefly.
Yes, I am an ecologist researcher by training. So I did a PhD in terrestrial ecology, used to be writing papers and working in research. So my first love was data and field work. And when I finished my degree, I was hired with Premier Tech, and I found this is a great balance between, discover the industrial and business side of this industry, but also I'm still linked and connected with the world of research and data, so I can marry the two. It's very satisfying for me.
I love that. I love that you're an ecologist. You love the ecology, and yet you are helping industry do a better job of taking care of that ecology. It's a perfect blend, and I think it makes you perfect for today's topic.
Yes, and I think it's the same for any industry. The best practice and change and improvement comes from within the industries, and that's why we take pride on what we do.
I know you'll be talking about that today. Now, let me do just a little bit of housekeeping. Veterans of my webinars will know that you can ask questions. We hope you ask questions. There's a little Q&A area, a tool on your dashboard. Go ahead and type it into that. I'll be monitoring those questions, and if it's pertinent to what Pierre-Olivier is speaking about at the time, I might interrupt him. Otherwise, we'll save those for the end, where we'll have some Q&A time. And the first question that I always get is this webinar going to be archived? Either you want to watch it later, share it with a colleague, or heaven forbid you have to leave early. Yes, it's always archived. within 30 or 45 minutes of the completion of it at the same place you signed up, which is growertalks.com/webinars. And now when I click the button and get a blank screen, I know it is time to turn it over to our guest expert, Pierre-Olivier Jean. If you'll go ahead and share your presentation and take it away.
Okay, let me know if this is working for you.
Looks perfect.
Excellent. So again, I'm glad to be here. I am Pierre-Olivier Jean. I've been working with Premier Tech for the past 9 years as a natural resource manager for the North American peat operations. And our team works with the compliance of all our peat extraction sites as well as the plants. And we are responsible also for planning the restoration of post-industrial peatlands. Our team also work with the Veriflora Responsibly Managed Peatland certification. As you understand, I will discuss these topics today with you. But so if I show you a little outline of my presentation, I will start with providing you a little bit of context for preparing the subject of the wise use of peat. I'll discuss one of the pillar of what makes our industry responsible is the restoration of post-industrial peatlands. I will also explain to you a little more in details about the certification, the Veriflora certification, of course. Explain to you how does it affect the quality and the responsibility of our products. And I will end my presentation with the future of peat. My goal here is to leave about 10 to 15 minutes for questions, so I hope I can achieve that today. I will not spend too much time explaining why we use peat moss. I think you in the audience already know why we use peat moss, but let's recap a little bit. Sphagnum is an organic material. It comes from peatlands. And when we extract this type of fiber, it has excellent properties for growing plants as a growing media. It holds up water, it holds up nutrients, yet it also has a high porosity to favor root growth. It's light, it's compressible, it has very low nutrient content by nature, so it's ideal as a base for growing media. It's a perfect canva for you growers to express yourselves. It's naturally pathogen-free, so it does tick a lot of boxes when it comes to growing media material. This is how it looks in the wild, the sphagnum plant, and this is how it might look in your bag. So that's for why do we use sphagnum peat. Now, I want to speak a little bit about the market and the difference between the situation in North America versus what's happening in Europe. First of all, the volume of peat moss that is extracted yearly in Canada is approximately between, roughly around 450 million cubic foot. Most of that peat moss is exported to the US, and the US in itself does produce sphagnum peat moss, but in much lower quantities. This is just because the peat deposits happen to be present in Canada mainly because of the climatic history of the land, basically. What you should know is that in Canada, peatlands are very abundant, and the peat industry impacted roughly about 0.3% of the peatland areas. But when we compare the situation with Europe, countries like in United Kingdom have over 95% of their peatlands that are impacted by either peat extraction or other industrial activities, including agriculture. So the the extent of the impact on natural environment is much older and much more important in size in Europe compared to what's happening in Canada. So that's important to process. That said, it does not mean that our industry does not have environmental impacts. That's not what I said. It's we have environmental impacts, and we're very upfront about these. These impacts are mostly occurring during the extraction years, of course. So when we remove the vegetation, when we drain the peatland in order to extract the resource, we will lose ecosystem functions, biodiversity, and carbon sequestration function of the peatland, as well as hydrology functions. Of course, the ecosystem services that are provided by the peatland will be affected as well. So if the peatland was used for recreational or traditional use, these uses will be impeded by the peat operation, of course. For greenhouse gas emissions, most of the emissions from our industry comes from the oxidation of the peat. So when we drain the peatland, we expose a layer of peat that would have been otherwise water saturated. And this peat will be exposed to oxygen and will start to decompose. And that's the main emission from our industry. But I'd like to, just for, you know, I could provide numbers all day long, but if you're not part of this world, or if you're not a carbon expert, you might not necessarily know what does it compare to. So our industry in Canada is responsible for roughly 1.5 megaton of CO2 equivalent on a yearly basis. That's roughly 0.2% of total Canadian greenhouse gas emissions. But if we compare to, you know, other industries, the whole emissions of the peat industry is roughly equivalent to one large cement factory, and about 2% of the greenhouse gas emissions from dog and cat food consumption in the US. So again, this is not to minimize the impact that we have on the environment, but it's just as a way to compare with other industries. It's also helping to factor in all the benefit our industry and the horticultural industry has on our world for making sure we can grow plants. So for starting this presentation, I'd like to emphasize that peatlands are precious. They're important. They offer ecosystem services to humans, but they also are very important in terms of ecosystem functions and must be carefully managed. And I'd like to say, to start this presentation, that for over 30 years, our industry has been a driving force in responsibly managing these peatlands. And I will explain how in the next few slides. And I want you to take you with me in this journey so that you can understand how our industry has been in the center of developing those techniques and collaborations with the research universities and governments. First of all, I want to speak about peatland restoration. It's been a continuous commitment for over 30 years, restoration of peatlands, and it is one of the pillars of sustainably and responsibly managing peatlands. So this is just a little, before I start, you know, explaining how does it work, just to show you, this is the site that was being restored, you know, in 1999, and now this picture was taken a couple of years ago, and we can see how how the vegetation, how the bog vegetation has came back. If you hear me say the word bog, bog is a term that we use to designate the types of peatland where we extract sphagnum moss. So just small disclaimer here. So in the early 90s, there was this question: how can we bring back ecosystem functions within post-industrial peatlands? Back 30 years ago, the outcome for post-industrial peatlands was maybe a little bit of re-wetting, try to block the drainage ditches, but there was not a lot of, it seemed that it was more an afterthought than something that was really planned, you know? And we had sites back then that were still on bare peat, even decades after the extraction had ceased. So in 1992, Lynn Rochefort is the main researcher behind the Peatland Ecology Research Group. But with other researchers, they initiated this group and has been working in the field of peatland restoration ever since. The industry restored over 4,800 acres of peatland using what we call now the moss layer transfer technique. If you type moss layer transfer technique in Google Scholar, you will have hundreds of publications regarding this method. It used to be called the Canadian approach because it was developed in Canada, but now all around the world there are scientists and practitioners that use this technique to restore ecosystem functions on peatlands. This is an example from a bog not far from Rivière-du-Loup, where I live. The site was restored 22 years ago, and you see from the sample on your right-hand side the accumulation of fresh sphagnum on the site. So it works. I'll tell you why in a minute. So again, I could probably discuss a couple hours on peatland restoration, but I'll try to be succinct and explain you the steps in general for restoring a peatland. When you initiate restoration effort in a peatland, you want to select a donor site. That means you select a pristine area where the sphagnum carpet and the plants have not been disturbed. And you use agricultural equipment to shred the surface, only the first few centimeters. Maybe some of you in the audience were present in 2013 in an event called Gardener's Writer that was in Quebec City. And this is a picture from the restoration that was completed part of this event. The site, the donor site where we took the donor plants, has recovered very quickly. And this is a picture of the very same place 6 years after plant material collection. And this is the same power line, so I'm not lying. So so in a nutshell, donor material, it works, and the donor site recover quickly. In the meantime, back in your post-industrial peatland, you want to profile the field as a flat surface. You want the water from snow, from the rain, to be evenly distributed on the site. When you refresh the surface, like we do with a profiler, you also maximize the contact between fresh, bare peat and the plant that you're going to introduce. And then, again, agricultural equipment, large scale, economy of scale, we want to be spreading a thin layer of the plant material on the surface. So I have a quick video just to show you. I don't know if it will work properly, but I love looking at tractors, that's why. But it's basically how it works. So when we have a thin layer of this plant material, we want to protect these plants from desiccation, and we will use straw mulch. Has been proven as an efficient and pretty cheap way of preserving the plant that we introduced. And as for the fertilization, restoration can be maximized using a light rock phosphate fertilization. It will not help necessarily the sphagnum moss to grow back, but it will help the pioneer species that will rapidly establish and protect the bare peat from frost heaving and desiccation. Once we've done that, we can make sure the re-wetting of the site is efficient so that there's no water escaping the site. We want to grow back a wetland. This is an example that I choose because it's emotional for me. I have been working with Permitech since 9 years, and I started in 2015. And I have seen vacuum harvesters on this field. Now it's been restored in 2016. So 7 years post-restoration, I took this picture in the fall. The restoration is very impressive. And what I'm trying to show with these pictures is the vegetation index. I think it's the NDVI. Don't remember the scale, but it's just to show you how, from 2017, we see the light color is the straw mulch that we spread. And only 4 years after, there's vegetation growing almost everywhere in the 55 acres that we restore back then. But I'll do more than show you pictures. I'll try to give you some literature and science-based evidence. So what you need to understand is that, reaching to using straw mulch, it's been tested. They tested several material to determine, what's the best mulch we can use? What's the best type of re-wetting we can use? What's the best type of equipment we can use? So behind all those, shining new literature, there are hundreds of little tests that were conducted, like increments in the research. And now we're really starting to collect the fruits of this research. So I'm really happy to say now that with confidence, the carbon sink functions of a restored peatland is recovered within 15 years post-restoration. That means that the peatland sequestrates more carbon than it emits. Also, not only carbon, but biodiversity is a similar level of biodiversity are recovered within 15 years post-restoration as well. The donor sites recover quickly. I've discussed that already, but it's on a paper. And the transfer rate of species from the donor site is around 82%, and we are working on the remaining 18% on new research. If you're not convinced, there's another way to discuss about it, is that recently there's been a meta-analysis on all the restoration efforts research in Canada. That includes forests, that includes prairies, peatlands, all different types of environment. And we see this is a heat map of the published research. And what we can see is there is three different, three important clusters of restoration efforts. One is located in the oil sands in Alberta. One is located near Sudbury in Ontario, where there's a long history of mining in that area. And the other hotspot is near Rivière-du-Loup and Bois-des-Belles peatland. That was the home of many restoration efforts and research. Bois-des-Belles is, if you are in the field of wetland restoration, if you're a scientist, Bois-des-Belles bog is probably on your bucket list area to visit. If you're interested, if you're visiting Rivière-du-Loup, feel free to reach for us. We'll organize something, a visit. This is just one of the first large-scale restoration experiment, and it was extensively used as a research station. And the PERG monitored this site very intensively. I discussed about the relationship between the industry and the researchers, but the industry in 2016, the CSPMA, the Canadian Sphagnum Peat Moss Association, committed to restore 100% of its historical disturbance on peatland by 2031. That means not only the industry wants to make sure best practice are implemented as of now, but to restore retroactively 100% of its historical disturbance. And I can say that we're roughly halfway through this objective. So we're working hard to achieve this goal. I want to complete the restoration topic by saying that one thing that I find that is unique about our industry is that we have in-house expertise regarding restoration, and not only natural resource managers like me, but operators. They're the starting point of all restoration. Train operators that have experience restoring wetlands, and they're the same operators that harvest the peat moss during the season. They know how to restore the sites, and we're very lucky to have that expertise in-house. So we provide training for the industries, and we are deeply involved into the conferences and workshops. If some of you had the chance of being at RE3 this summer in Quebec City, Reclaim, Restore, Rewild conference, Premier Tech and other members of the industry were really involved into organizing, but also presenting restoration work that have been done on their sites. Now, restoration is still linked with the certification, but I want to emphasize more on Veriflora, which is a responsibly managed peatland certification. So there's several components to what defines sustainability, and there is the environment for sure, but there's also the social and human aspects of the sustainability that are important. And we always think about the environment, but we must think of sustainability as a whole. When you buy a Veriflora certified product, you buy something that is extracted in an environmentally and socially responsible manner. And certified companies are inspected and challenged in a way that they have to preserve peatlands for future generations, reduce stress on the environment, but also improve the welfare of workers and nearby communities. The inception of the certification dates back from the early 90s, where in Europe, there's been an increased awareness in peatland protection. And there was a lot of a lot of things that were changing back then in Europe regarding the peat industry. At the same time, the North American industry was very young and the footprint was very small. So it's with a strong will to be proactive instead of reactive. The North American industry reach and create a certification with it's a third party that evaluates the producers that are certified. The certification was officially launched in 2009, and at the time we over 80% of all the peat produced in Canada is certified. I want to start, with the social aspects of the certification. So when the auditor comes at our plants and sites, he wants to know if the team members are well treated, if the things that are within the whether it's if it's a unionized site or not unionized site, they want to know if the conditions are competitive, and if there's and if the team members are happy to work there. There's a strong component on health and safety within the plants, within the bogs. So there's a lot of emphasis on health and safety, and also making sure the companies they're involved in the communities. Do they listen to the concerns of the neighboring stakeholders? Do they participate in stakeholders meetings that happen in these areas? So there's one part of the certification that people don't necessarily think about. Another part of the certification that may not be obvious to all of you is the quality aspects. It's important regarding the certification that the company has a management of its inventories and that the product is traceable. The product is monitored, and it also means that we have a complaint management system. These are just example. And what I want, I guess, where I want to go with this is that we think of the certification as, a big wish for sustainability. But in the end of the day, the small things are very important and will affect all the process of production of our product. And some of you might wonder why I took this picture. I took this picture in a couple of years ago, and this is just the printer on the packaging machine. It was not working properly. But that tiny thing, would impact traceability of the product down the line, if you order ProMix and that you have a quality problem with your ProMix. We want to know which pile of peat moss was this and why, we have this problem. We want to be able to trace back the problem at the source so that there's no other customer that will have the same problem, So traceability, very important, and small things are also part of the certification. Obviously, the environmental aspects are very important. Waste management, energy consumption, efficiency. And one thing I want to emphasize on is also that even if you're really good at what you do, the status quo is not an option when you're certified. You need to be improving constantly. You need to have objective. And I guess this is one of the main things that differentiates certified and non-certified products. And of course, protection of species. Are we enforcing our mitigation measures that we committed to? Are we restoring our sites, and are we planning the restoration of our sites too? There's no room for improv. There is always, adaptive management, but we cannot, it's not something that you improvise. You need to be carefully planning these restoration works. I think I'm good in my timing. So I just took the two main pillars of what I consider the responsible management of peatlands: restoration work, certification, and I want to go into the future of this resource, and I want to discuss the wise use of this resource. What I can tell you is that there's been, over the past 20 years, an increasing change in regulation in every province in Canada and the United States. And what would have been a 2 to 5 year process in obtaining permission is now triple that in some cases, and more. This is for projects that happen, but there are also projects that don't happen. There's an increased attention and awareness on peatland protection, and it's all for the good. It's all for good reasons. But when you look at this and you have that study from Block that says that projected 400% demand increase for growing media by 2050, you have to wonder, okay, what can we do to face this situation? For those of you who have not read for the record, I had started the preparation of my presentation before this issue of Grower Talk, but I thought that the timing was perfect because this issue of January 2024 discuss peat extenders. As demand increases, so does the need for reducing the pressure on peat resource. And that's exactly what Growertalks discuss about it in this issue, was that what can you do to face the shortage of peat mixes? Because peat shortage have big impacts on growers. And so I'm not an expert on growing media. My specialty is more peatlands and natural resource management. So that I'm going to give you my angle as a natural resource manager. And I know that those shortages have big impact on growers, and that replacing peat is challenging and can be very costly. There was a study 2021 that showed that eliminating peat usage in North America using the available material at the moment would cost $18 billion US annually. You can look at it the way you want, but it's replacing or eliminating peat would be very costly because the other materials have a cost too. So the demand increase, so does the concern about climate change and food security. There are more and more field crops that move into controlled environment, agriculture, greenhouse. When you operate in a controlled environment, you save water, you save fertilizer, you save on pesticide. Pathogen protection is better, and you can produce food locally, believe it or not, but in Quebec with minus 15 degrees Celsius. I'm not that good with Fahrenheit yet. I'll be better in the future. But you can produce local food in greenhouse, and that had a real value when the pandemic hit. There was a lot of movement to take to accelerate local food production. Obviously, if you produce locally, you reduce your transport and you produce less carbon emissions. So all these factors leads us to understand that it's going to be an increased pressure on peat moss in the future and on other materials. It's important that you understand that we love peat. Peat is exciting. I'm excited about peat, but other materials are exciting too. And it's what I found very interesting to discover in the years that I've worked here is peat is an efficient enabler for other materials. And I collected a couple, interesting readings for rainy days that show that potential for peat as an enabler. Here's the study from PLOS ONE. It's a very rigorous journal. They tried, to complement the peat with palm fiber green compost. And what they found is that the optimal growth performance was reached with a combination of these 3 different materials. So these individual material alone were not performing well enough, but in combining it with peat, in some case only a little, in some case more, the performance was optimal. There's other example for that. Some materials that you guys already know about, but some research has been conducted in stratifying bark with peat in the pot so that you can extend your peat supply. Some have discussed the synergy between core and peat, and some have tried. Another example is sugarcane bagasse. It's the leftover from the process of sugarcane treatment combined with peat has shown to be a promising future solution as well. So before I end my presentation, I'd like to emphasize that Primitech and the peat industry has had a strong leadership role in developing methods and a culture in responsible peatland management and the wise use of peat. And one thing that I'd like you to remember is that in the peat industry, we love peat, but we also love peatlands. And we have the feeling that peat will be a driver of change and a driver of improvement in substrate science. And that it's not a thing of the past. And it's not peat against the other materials. Peat should be part of the future. And I'll be very happy to take questions from you.
That's a great message, Pierre-Olivier. I really appreciated that. And we do have some questions that have come in. Let's stop the screen share. I'm going to do that right now real quick so we can see you. I have a quick question for you.
Go ahead.
Peat, what other industries use peat moss? Or is the gardening and horticulture industry the only one?
Okay. First of all, there are several types of peat. Peat, the definition of peat is it's an accumulation of organic material that has accumulated over centuries. So in the tropic, you would have peat that's from dead trees. You'd have peat from some of you have heard about sedge peat as well. So depending on the type of peat, the use will be also different. Has a growing media, sphagnum peat has the most value, so to speak. Sedge peat is also used, but it will be used more in applications like golf course and landscaping more. So not necessarily in the horticultural industry. Peat also will be used not only for growing plants, and some countries have been using peat for eating purpose for centuries. But I'd say that sphagnum peat moss right now in 2024 is mainly used as a horticultural. It has been used as a wound dressing and you know as in medication, but it's mainly for horticultural purpose.
I think it's been used in automotive seats too, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I read that somewhere.
That's interesting. Maybe
Look
it's
that
a
one up.
new business.
Roger wants to know how many species of peat moss are involved in the industry. Does it get down to the species of sphagnum? And are some more successful for restoration than others when you're doing that harvesting of the donor material?
Okay, that's a very good and interesting question. So there are tens of sphagnum species, and I don't know all of them. But one thing that I know is when we plan a restoration, we will want to have an assemblage of species that are generally resistant to desiccation and drier. So you'd have the red ones, the red sphagnum rubellum that creates, hummocks on the surface of pristine peatlands that have good properties for peat moss, and they also are pretty resistant to the shock of restoration. And we also want to have another moss that is not part of your horticultural peat moss necessarily, but it's called the polytrichum, and that's a pioneer species that is really good at establishing rapidly and preparing the land for the restoration. So, there are many nuances that I don't give for my answer, but that's a very good question.
All right. We have two fauna related questions.
Yep.
Dr. Leka Spreethar wants to know about fauna in a peat bog. Biodiversity wise, what type of fauna inhabits a peat biome?
Yes. So,
and in fact, let me add the second question in because it'll be related. Michael Davenport wants to know, before harvesting, is there an FQA of sites? And I looked up FQA while you were speaking. That's a floristic quality assessment. That was a new one to me. So is there a floristic quality assessment of sites? And does a peat company ever not harvest because of the presence of, say, an endangered species? So what lives in a bog, and do you try to protect it?
Okay. For the fauna questions, it can vary. Macrofauna use peat bogs for food foraging. Bears like their fruits. There's a lot of whereas you have some ungulate species that will use bogs as shelter for calving, for instance. Caribou, woodland caribou in Canada use peatlands for calving grounds, for instance. It's not necessarily an area for herbivores to forage much, not necessarily. But there's also all kinds of microfauna and amphibians that can dwell in these environments. As for the floristic inventory, it was not the case 50 or 40 years ago, but every new permission prior to operating a peat harvest site needs some kind of ecological impact assessment. That includes plant survey, hydrology assessment, flora and fauna surveys. So all these document needs to be done prior to the proposal of your project. So yes, and there are places that have been prevented from permitting because of endangered or plants that had a status, or animals that had a status on the list of endangered species. Yes.
Who's responsible for the permitting? Who can tell a peat company like Premier Tech, no, you can't go into your own bog and harvest?
So the provincial governments in Canada have the authority on permitting these natural resources. There's always the Ministry of Environment usually, and all the different provinces have a little bit different permits name, but it all comes down to the same general architecture. So it's the Ministry of Environment that's responsible for the environmental permission. In the United States, and I can speak for my experience in Minnesota, because we are based in Minnesota too. It's both the state agencies, MPCA, and DNR, Department of Natural Resource, and the federal agencies. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer, they do the wetland assessment and wetland permitting. U.S. is more complicated in
Really?
terms of
that's
because there's
surprising.
more agencies, but it's
More red tape.
basically, but it's all the same, general idea. There's need to be some ecological impact statement before any project can start.
I can't imagine any agency is a pushover, and I can only imagine they're getting more challenging to you than the other way around, which is a good thing if we're talking about
Yeah,
preserving
exactly.
the ecology. Let's see. Jean-Marc wants to know a basic question: how deep is a Canadian bog, and how much do you harvest off of that before restoring it?
Very good question. So to make a deposit worth all the efforts, not only the efforts of opening the bog, but all the planning and documentation that you need to do before, you need to have a certain depth to make it viable economically. So you need at least, I'd say, roughly 2 meters. So that would be six foot of horticultural peat to make it worth a project. And don't quote me on that, but it's, less than 2 meters. It's a bit challenging.
All right.
In Eastern Canada, we have deposits that were over, was it 32 feet of depth. The bogs in Eastern North America are older, so they're deeper. And in Western Canada, we have deposits that 3 to 5 meters deep. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, by the way, minus 15°C is 5 degrees Fahrenheit above zero. I looked that one up as well.
Thank you.
Let's see. Janelle wants to know, after restoring a bog, is it reharvested from the same location again? I would guess no, because the restoration process is sort of so new. You wouldn't want to go in there and disturb that.
Or if you do, you have to do it 2,000 or 3,000 years after, because these sites, the peat has been removed. So there's the depth that, and I forgot to answer one component of the other question, and I will answer it right now. We have to leave peat in the bottom of the deposit because otherwise we cannot reintroduce the plants. pH is key in reintroducing plants. So we need to leave at least, I'd say, 2 feet, 1.5 feet in the bottom at least, to make sure we can regrow plants. So I don't know if I answered the
Yeah, I think
question.
so. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, let's see. So, in other words, you will reharvest in 2,000, 3,000 years, something like that.
Well, that's not. It's just a little joke, just to say that it's not the reason.
Right,
When
but
in
with only 0.03% of the Canadian bogs even being harvested, there's plenty of virgin bog to work
Yes,
from without having to disturb the restoration areas.
yes. But
Um,
one thing I can add is, maybe, for instance, the restored bogs could be used for as a donor site for other, instead of disturbing a pristine. It could be used like that, but not for the purpose of harvesting peat moss.
Yeah, I would think that would have had to have been challenging to get permission to do. We're going to go into this pristine area, churn it all up to harvest donor material to put on this other bog, but don't worry, it'll look good in 7 years.
Hmm.
That must have been challenging to get the okay for that one.
Well, for the new operations, that's easier because we plan it from the get-go. So 30 years from starting restoration, we will reserve an area as a donor site.
Yeah.
But it was not the case 30 years ago.
All right. Several folks picked up on you mentioning an increase, an expected 400% increase in demand for growing media. And they're all asking, well, how will the Canadian peat industry keep up with that? Um, let's see, restoration timelines involving that. Where's it going to come from? So talk a little bit more
Mhm.
about that.
Careful planning, a lot of planning. If you, just from a business standpoint, if you want to invest money in a plant, several $1 million, you need to be having some, guarantee that you will have the material to feed your plant. But there's also a lot of research on peat complementing. The different material that are out there, whether it's bark or core or other materials. So there's a lot of research as to complement peat. But at the same time, we also work diligently in carefully planning projects that are that peat extraction projects, to put material on the market
Like,
responsibly.
like growers, greenhouse growers who you serve, you're at the mercy of the weather up there. And the last 3 seasons have been negatively impacted by the weather. Is there
Yes.
anything you can do about that?
Well, we can adjust, like we can harvest the moss a little heavier, but then we have to compromise on quality, shipping. So it's always, a matter of trying to have the most efficient way to prepare the fields. And you know, harvesting peat moss, it's a work of art. We have operators that have been operating for 40 years plus. They walk the field and they feel the moisture in the air, and I will use this type of harrow instead of this type of harrow. And they have a fine, and training and carrying on this knowledge to the next generation of operators will certainly help to be more efficient in the field. So now, that said, when it's raining, it's raining. Peat is not dry, so we have to play with that.
Yeah. All right. Last question. Well, maybe I've got one more. I mentioned at the beginning the negative messaging that's out there.
Hmm.
Other than these restoration efforts, which to me are major, what else is the peat industry doing to combat the negative messaging out there in the mainstream press?
I think it's providing facts and participating in webinars and speaking, and there's a strong science component to our industry, and we we want to be respectfully providing the right information to growers, to the public, and make sure we are better in communicating the facts about our industry, yet at the same time be part of this continuous improvement and make sure we're always better from year to year.
Yeah. Well, having you as part of the industry team, Pierre-Olivier, is a great step forward in that effort. So the more we can get you out there, an
Thank you.
ecologist, speaking about the ecology of the peat industry, the better off we are. Let's, if you have more questions, that's all we have time for. I'm going to share Pierre-Olivier's email address. They do very interesting email addresses up there at Premier Tech. It's a series of 4 initials. You get a number, so there must be another Jeep up there.
Yeah.
Another Jean or somebody. So anyway, there it is, JEAP2 at premiertech.com. If your question didn't get answered, or if you have more questions or want to learn more about the Canadian peat ecology. And as I said at the beginning, I will archive this webinar just as soon as we've finished it up at the same place you sign up, growertalks.com/webinars. Always check back there to see what other webinars we might have coming up, because I know I've got some in the works. And so that's pretty much it. Pierre-Olivier, thanks so much
Thank you
for
very
sharing
much.
your expertise. And on behalf of Pierre-Olivier and all of his peat moss appreciating colleagues at Premier Tech, and for my Stellar Ball Publishing staff who work hard so I don't have to, I'm Chris Beatties saying so long, everybody. Zoom wave.